Good afternoon, one and all my dear student. Today we will cover what are the different mechanisms of drug absorption. So first lecture we was study what is mean by drug absorption. So drug absorption, which is the phenomenon or the process where movement of drug from site of administration to the site of action, or the process of movement of drug from site of administration to the systemic circulation, that is called as drug absorption. So in this lecture we was covered in what mechanism or in which mechanism when we take any dosage form, this dosage form which will be absorbed through different mechanism. So in that is, for example, passive diffusion, active transport, facilitated diffusion, ion pair transport, or endocytosis. So there are different mechanisms are there for drug absorption. So see, here there are different mechanisms of drug absorption. In that, first of all, transcellular transport, second one, paracellular transport, and third one, vesicular transport. So in that transcellular transport, again, two main mechanisms are there. First one, that is called as passive transport process, and second one, that is called as active transport process. So in that passive transport process, again involved the passive diffusion, pore transport, ion pair transport, and facilitated diffusion. And in active transport process, the two main important mechanisms are there. First one, that is called as primary active transport, and second one, that is called as the secondary active transport. In again secondary active transport, there are a sub type or the sub mechanism. First called as the symport, and second one that is called as the antiport. So in transcellular transport, the two main important mechanisms are there, that is passive transport and active transport. Then next one, paracellular transport. Paracellular transport, in that the persorption is there and permeation through tight junction of cell. And last one, that is called as the vesicular transport, or it is also called as the endocytosis. So in that, two main mechanisms are there. First one, that is called as the pinocytosis, and second one, that is called as the phagocytosis. So see one by one. So what is mean by passive diffusion? So first of all, diffusion means what? What is mean by diffusion? So diffusion, that is the movement of drug or molecules from high to low concentration, that is called as the diffusion. So in the passive diffusion, it is related with your diffusion concept. So passive diffusion mainly involve the movement of your drug or movement of molecules from high to low concentration, that is called as the passive diffusion. So this passive diffusion is also called as the non-ionic diffusion. Majority the major process of the absorption done with passive diffusion process. That means the 90% drug which will be absorbed through passive diffusion mechanism. So this passive diffusion, it is also called as the electrochemical gradient or the non-ionic diffusion. This passive diffusion mainly follow the fixed first law of diffusion. So this fixed first law related with the movement of drug from high to low concentration. So this fixed first law is expressed as mathematically, that is dq by dt is equal to dA km by w h into cjit minus c. So what is mean by this fixed first law of diffusion? This fixed first law of diffusion mainly state that the drug molecules which diffuses from a region of higher concentration to region of lower concentration until the equilibrium is attained. And mainly this fixed first law is mathematically expressed by this equation which is given on slide, that is the dq by dt is equal to dA km by wh into cjit minus c, where dq by dt it is called as the rate of diffusion and mainly expressed in amount per time. This dq by dt, that is called as the rate of diffusion, also represent the rate of appearance of a blood or the of a drug in blood. Then second one term, that is the capital D. So what is mean by capital D? So this capital D, it is called as the diffusion coefficient of drug through the membrane. And this capital D mainly expressed in area per time. Then next one, that is capital A. So what is mean by capital A? This capital A represent the surface area of the absorbing membrane for drug diffusion. So mostly this surface area expressed in area as a symbol. The next term, that is km by w. So what is mean by this km by w? It is called as the partition coefficient of drug between lipoidal membrane and the aqueous gastrointestinal fluids. So next, CJIT minus C, it is the difference in concentration of a drug in gastrointestinal fluid and the plasma. It is also called as the concentration gradient and mainly expressed in amount per volume. And last one, that is small h. So this is the thickness of the membrane or the length of the membrane. So this is the overview of the fixed first law of diffusion. So see, what are the various characteristics of passive diffusion? So this passive diffusion mainly called as the concentration gradient or the non-ionic diffusion. This passive diffusion is the process, it is the energy independent process along with the non-saturable. Mostly it is the drug moves down the concentration gradient indicating the downhill process or the downhill transport. So there is the no involvement of ATP molecules, so called as the energy independent. So see next characteristics, So greater the area and lesser the thickness of the membrane, faster will be the diffusion. So see, from fixed first law of diffusion or the fixed first law of diffusion, so in the mathematical expression, we mathematical expression in that we see the surface area of the absorbing membrane, which is directly proportional to the rate of diffusion, and the thickness of membrane, which are inversely proportional to the rate of drug diffusion. So greater the area, there will be the faster diffusion, unless and until where when the thickness of membrane is low, the faster will be the diffusion. The next characteristic is that the process rapid over for a short distance. So mostly the rate of drug transport or the drug transfer is directly proportional to the concentration gradient between gastrointestinal fluid and the blood compartment. Okay, so see, the concentration which is equal on both the side of the membrane when the equilibrium is attained or the achieved. So mostly the equilibrium is attained when the concentration on the either side of the membrane becomes equal. So see next characteristic, greater the partition coefficient of a drug, faster will be the drug diffusion, because our cell membrane is lipoidal in nature. When the lipophilic drug diffuses at a faster rate by solubilizing in the lipid membrane or the lipid layer of the membrane. So the greater the partition coefficient of a drug, faster will be the absorption of a drug or faster will be the drug rate. See the next characteristics. The molecular weight between 100 to 400 daltons are effectively absorbed. So this passive diffusion process is energy independent process, and the drug mostly having molecular weight in between 100 to 400 daltons are effectively absorbed through passive diffusion process. So the diffusion generally decreases with increasing in the molecular weight of the compound. For example, cyclosporine A. This cyclosporine A, which are having molecular weight that is 12,000 Dalton. So this 12,000 Dalton, it mainly absorbs orally much better than any other peptides. So mostly the molecular weight which having 100 to 400 Daltons are effectively absorbed through passive diffusion process. So see, the passively absorbed drug enter blood rapidly, swept away and distributed into a larger volume of body fluid. Hence, the concentration of a drug at absorption site, that is CGIT, is maintained greater than the concentration in the plasma, and such a condition is called as the sink condition for drug absorption. So there will be the greater the concentration of the drug at the absorption site, which is greater than the concentration of a drug in plasma. That is called as the sink condition for a drug or the sink condition. Then next, under usual absorption condition, the capital A, capital D, that is the diffusion coefficient of a drug, or the surface area of a drug or a surface area of the absorbing membrane along with the partition coefficient of a drug that are constant parameter and which will be replaced by the combined constant that is called as the permeability coefficient, or it is denoted as the symbol capital P. Permeability mainly is with the drug which can penetrate or diffuses through a membrane. So due to sink condition, the concentration is very small in comparison to concentration in GIT fluid. Okay, so this is all about the passive diffusion along with the characteristic of the passive diffusion. Then next, what is meant by pore transport? This is the second mechanism of drug absorption, that is the pore transport. So this pore transport, it is also called as the convective transport or the bulk flow or the filtration. So mainly the mechanism of pore transport is that through the protein channel, the absorption of a drug which will be carried out. So mostly the drug permeation through pore transport, that is the renal excretion, removal of a drug from cerebrospinal fluid and entry of a drug into the liver. So for example, chain-like compound or the linear compounds having a molecular weight up to 400 daltons, which can be transport or which can be filtered or which can be absorbed by this mechanism that is called as the pore transport. Let's see the driving force or the osmotic pressure differences across the membrane. Thus, bulk flow of water along with the small solid molecules through aqueous channel. Water flux that promote such a transport is called as the solvent drag. The process is very important in absorption, which having a molecular weight less than 100 daltons along with the less molecular size or the low molecular size, and generally the water soluble drugs which can be transport through the pore transport mechanism. For example, sugar or the urea. So this having a low molecular weight and having a low molecular size. So let's see next mechanism that is called as the ion pair transport. So this ion pair transport mainly responsible for absorption of a compounds which ionizes at all in pH value. For example, quaternary ammonium or the sulfonic acid compounds. So mostly what is the mechanism of this ion pair transport? So this in the ion pair transport in the GIT or the gastrointestinal lumen, the cationic drug and the anion which form the neutral ion pair complex, and this neutral ion pair complex process the cell membrane through the passive diffusion process, and then it reaches into the systemic circulation or into the blood. In blood, it again this complex or this ion pair complex or neutral ion pair complex again dissociated into positive charge and negative charge, and free drug mostly form. So this is the main mechanism of ion pair transport. For example, propranolol, which is the basic drug that form an ion pair with olic acid and absorbed by ion pair transport mechanisms. Then next, that is carrier mediated transport. So what is meant by carrier mediated transport? So mostly in the carrier mediated transport, name itself indicates that the involvement of carriers is involved for the transportation of a drug. So mostly the carrier which bind to any of the solute molecules and it form solute carrier complex. This solute carrier complex crosses the cell membrane and go into the systemic circulation or the blood. And in blood, again, dissociation phenomenon is there. So this solute carrier complex dissociated and free drug is released. So this carrier mediated transport mainly involved the two main or the two types, that is facilitated diffusion and active transport. So what is meant by facilitated diffusion? Facilitated diffusion is a form of carrier transport that does not require the expenditure of cellular energy. So this facilitated diffusion is also called as the concentration gradient, and the particles mainly moves from a region of higher concentration to lower concentration. What is meant by active transport mechanism? So in the active transport mechanism, it requires the ATP molecules for the transportation purpose. That means the movement of a drug from low to high concentration. So when we go from low to high concentration, the involvement of ATP is required in active transport process. So mostly the metabolic energy which are provided by the active transport mechanism or the involvement of ATP molecules is required in active transport process. So see, in active transport process, again, there are subtypes, that is primary active transport and secondary active transport. So what is meant by primary active transport? Primary active transport, so in this process, there is a direct involvement of ATP or the direct requirement of ATP, and the process where only one ions or the molecules transport in one direction, it is called as the uniport. For example, absorption of glucose molecules. Then secondary active transport. In the secondary active transport, so there is no involvement of ATP or no direct requirement of ATP for transportation purpose. So in that secondary active transport, it is also called as the co-transport or the coupled transport. So in the secondary active transport, again, two main types is there, that is symport and antiport. So what is meant by symport and what is meant by antiport? So see in the next slide. So see in the slide, in the diagram, what is meant by antiport and what is meant by symport. So symport involve the movement of both the molecules in the same direction, that is called as the symport or the co-transport mechanisms. And what is meant by antiport? Mainly the antiport involves the movement of molecules in opposite direction. So main difference in between symport and antiport is that symport, that is the movement of your drug or movement of drug molecules which absorb in same direction, that is called as the symport mechanism, and antiport, that is the movement of drug molecules which absorb in opposite direction, that is called as the antiport mechanism. So see next, last one, that is the endocytosis. So what is meant by endocytosis? So mostly endocytosis, that is the engulfment of molecules through the cell, that is called as the endocytosis mechanism. So this endocytosis mechanism, which is a minor transport mechanism and mainly involved the engulfment of extracellular materials within a segment of a cell membrane to form a vesicle, that is called as the endocytosis. So in the endocytosis, it is also called as the vesicular transport system or the vesicular transport mechanism. So this endocytosis again divided into three main mechanisms, that is phagocytosis, pinocytosis, and transcytosis. So see one by one what is meant by phagocytosis. This phagocytosis, that is called as the cell eating mechanism. That is the adsorption or the uptake of solid molecules or the engulfment of solid molecules, that is called as the phagocytosis. It is also called as the cell eating. Then pinocytosis, it is called as the cell drinking mechanism. That is the uptake of or the engulfment of liquid particles, that is called as the pinocytosis. And last one, transcytosis. What is meant by transcytosis? So mostly the orally absorbed vaccines or the large protein molecules which are absorbed through the pinocytosis mechanism, but or the sometimes the endocytic vesicles which is transferred from one extracellular component to the another. So this mechanism is called as the transcytosis mechanism. So these are all are the mechanism of drug absorption. Thank you.